Go ahead. I'm just waiting, and we are now live on Facebook. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our latest In Conversation from Exeter Library. This evening, I'm joined by Helen Fields and Louise Sharland. Exeter Library is one of 54 libraries run by the charity Libraries Unlimited across Devon and Torbay. And this event is also being held this evening in partnership with the British Library Unfinished Business exhibition. So I'd like to welcome Helen and Louise for coming along this evening.
Lovely to be here.
So I'll do the little introduction first, and then you can correct me, because I'm always really wary about doing these sort of publicity things that they've got it right. So So Helen practiced criminal and family law as a barrister. And she now runs a media company with her husband. She's best known for being the author of, and I'm going to hopefully pronounce this right, the D.I. Callan. I can't even say it now. Callanach.
It was good.
Set in Scotland. So this is not your first rodeo by a long shot. Louise, however, this is her first book, which she will tell you about shortly. And Louise moved to the UK from her native Canada nearly 30 years ago after falling in love with a British sailor.
For my sins.
She began writing short stories when her children were little, and her work appeared in magazines, anthologies and online. And in 2019, Louise won the big issue crime writing competition, and this book, which she will tell you about in 1 minute, is her first published novel. So Yay. Good evening. Welcome to you, Helen and Louise.
Hi, everybody.
So firstly, Helen, would you like to tell us about your new novel, The Shadow Man, which is a move away from your series?
It is. It is. I'm going to wave a copy at you so that when you see it, next week you'll see it. This is The Shadow Man. My publishers did a lovely cover, I think. I'm liking it. Yeah. Look, watch this. The nails are half red and half, there we go. Can we get this?
Nice. Oh, that is really
teal.
That's attention to detail, Helen.
I really like that.
That's what lockdown does to you, actually. The insanity of lockdown.
Yeah, I love the cover. It's a great cover. I had it on PDF, so I didn't get the cover. That's the only thing with ebooks.
Oh, yeah.
You don't always get the lovely covers, but yeah.
I know. I love my Kindle, actually, but it's the only thing. The black and white. So yes, The Shadow Man is still set in Edinburgh, which my detective series also is. And actually, a couple of the characters from the Callanach series hop over into this book, because what's happened is that my usual characters, MIT, are very, very busy, and they've called in a bit of extra help in the form of a forensic psychologist who's a profiler, an American profiler who's previously worked a little bit with the FBI, people like that, Connie Woolwine. She comes over and she is paired up with a detective from London who's a kidnapping specialist. And the two of them pair up and they work in Edinburgh to start with, looking at a series of kidnappings, which then turn into something much nastier and much spookier. But at the heart of this is a man who is not necessarily by nature a very bad man, but he's suffering something from Cotard syndrome, also known as walking corpse syndrome. All of this is real. This is real psychology. These are real things. I'll tell you a bit more about it later, but that's it. A series of people go missing. A profiler is trying to figure out who, and because of the weirdness of his psychology, they find it incredibly hard to follow a pattern and catch him. Will they get there before it's too late?
You have to read to find out.
That's me.
Yeah, both of the books have got really strong. I love a book that's got a good strong start. I'm not for wishy-washy starts. I like to get right in there. So Louise, and your book, The Lake, would you like to tell us about that one?
Yeah, it's more of a psychological suspense, psychological thriller, and it was really inspired by something I read, God, nearly 20 years ago now. And it was to do with people who've experienced really terrible things, whether it's the loss of a loved one through an accident or violence or something, and how people can forgive. I was really interested in this notion of forgiveness in the most terrible of circumstances. But what, as all crime writers do, I wanted to look at the person on the opposite side of the coin, a person who couldn't forgive, and what happens to them when they're in a situation like that. So the story really is about a woman whose 15-year-old son is drowned 5 years ago. And through a series of circumstances, almost fatalistic, she begins to believe that his death wasn't an accident. And it's really about her psychological journey, but also all the things she does to try and find the truth out. And I was looking at how sometimes you can be morally corrupted, even the best people, by that desire for justice, truth, and ultimately revenge. So what I really wanted to do was kind of get the readers to walk with me and think, what would I do in this situation? And a lot of that happens in the book, where I kind of bring you along with me and ask questions. Would you do that? How far would you go? So I hope it's entertaining, but we'll see.
Yes, yes. Well, no, it certainly is. So you both have got quite, got interesting backgrounds as well, and I'm sort of interested in whether your backgrounds have sort of inspired you to go down the sort of crime and I guess crime and psychology sort of go hand in hand, because you don't really, well, unless you are a sort of serial killer, you're not going to you won't look at that side of it. But if you're looking into crime, you were fascinated with the person who does the crime, aren't you? So Helen, you've got a background in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
Did that influence you to write this genre? Was that sort of, or have you always been interested in?
I've always liked really dark. So I can remember as a very young child wanting to read the darkest fiction I could get hold of. And it was the usual kind of, sort of Stephen King, James Herbert, that sort of thing, as many as I could get hold of. Very few people out there, I think, will probably remember the name Dennis Wheatley, but Dennis Wheatley wrote sort of World War II, very, very dark novels. And we don't think about them now. And a lot about devil worship, and that sort of thing, really bizarre novels. And my father wasn't much of a reader, but he had a set of original Dennis Wheatleys in the house.
My mum had one on the shelf. I remember that. It's really weird.
They're really, really bizarre.
That's a real blast from the past.
Yeah.
And really weird covers.
Yes, they're very weird books. But I started reading those really as soon as I could kind of read those lengths of words. I know that was what, physically being able to read it. And I remember, because I grew up in the middle of Hampshire in a tiny village, New Forest, kind of my days were spent bibbling along, looking at flowers and ponies and things like that. And I remember just this terrible desire to go home and read something as dark and horrific as I could. And I think I was offsetting the lovely, lovely Hampshire countryside. But so I've always loved it. And I kind of fell into criminal law because I like the drama of it and things like that. So I think with or without being a criminal barrister, I would probably have ended up writing something very, very dark. And I say that because at times I've tried to force myself to write something lighter. And I go, do you know what? I'm going to write a rom-com. And then someone's dead. Someone's 2 pages in. Someone is dead. In the most.
That's a rom-com I would read.
Yeah, I think there could definitely be a market for that out there.
You know what, there probably is. The problem is the way I do deaths is just not, it's not even appropriate. I've been told it's not really even appropriate for crime novels, which is bad. And there's an example of this brilliantly through libraries. There's a scene in, I think, my second book, Perfect Prey, where a very lovely librarian is found strung up from a beautiful library in Exeter, strung from the ceiling, having been skinned. Can I say that?
Sacrilege.
Feeling a bit. I know. I love libraries. That's not personal. So yes, the darkness was already there. I think obviously it made it easier to write police procedure, court procedure, and I defended and prosecuted. I did both. So obviously I spent a lot of time with the police. Their psychology is quite interesting. The psychology of having to try and be the good guy, and sometimes you have to be the bad guy too. That's quite difficult without crossing lines, and they have to cross lines. But also, obviously, I spent a lot of time in prisons and a lot of time with people who, some of whom were just bad, and some of whom, frankly, chose to be bad, and others who, if you look at the backgrounds to their lives and where they come from, honestly, pretty much had no choice. and just ended up in a bad place. And so I think I took all of those elements with me. I took some of those characters, obviously no real cases, but also some people that I found myself really not liking. I found myself cross-examining expert witnesses who were just pompous and patronizing and horrible, and there are a couple of those that I've shoved into the book, you know. And I think what you do as a writer, so my experience is this, is you pick up people as you go along through life, and you end up sitting down and writing a book, and you throw all of those people, whether you've loved them or hated them or fascinated by them, and that you throw them in. And so yes, my background made it much easier to write police procedurals. And it made it very quick and very fluid for me. But it was the people along the way that really give that the colour and texture.
Yeah, no, that's I guess with the police procedurals as well, I guess if you don't get it right, then people will tell you.
Oh, I know. I got some crime scene tape the wrong colour at one point. I got in quite a lot of trouble.
I always sort of laugh when it's not funny, because obviously it's not my books, but some poor authors get, you know, horrific reviews on Amazon because they've put the wrong, you know, you've said the wrong word, or you know, and it's like, well, it's not real, it's, you know, that's not how it is. So I guess you have to sort of know your stuff, don't you, if you're going to do that. And Louise, so your sort of writing journey started with sort of magazines and
short fiction.
Yeah, short fiction. And then you won the big issue competition in 2019, and that sort of gave you did that give you a book deal straight away, or did you?
It did. It gave me a 2-book deal with Avon Books.
Yeah.
But before that, I mean, I've been writing since my kids were little, and I was doing short fiction. And I guess you could say it was kind of literary fiction. And I was lucky enough to win the Woman in Home magazine short story competition in 2010, I think. But very much like Helen, my work has always had an underpinning kind of tension. It's always that tension. And I decided that's where I wanted. I think when I won the short story competition, I thought, oh, maybe I can do this for a living. God, if only I knew. I know now. But I think I looked at developing that tension, and the psychological idea. I really, what Helen said really resonates. This idea of the wealth of people you meet. So I've worked in prisons as well. I've met people who've done terrible things. I've met people who've gone through the system and been kind of left, kind of pushed aside. And so I'm really interested in how people become who they are. So that's kind of what I like to explore in my novels as well. But I think I worked for a homeless charity, a national homeless charity. And I've worked with ex-offenders, I've worked with people in recovery, people with complex mental health. And for me, I'm really interested in the people I worked with had enormous compassion. So even police, probation services and support workers who had to deal with people who've done some pretty awful things. And ultimately they have to be professional, but I was really surprised that they could still bring kind of humanity and compassion to their role, because ultimately they are trying to keep that person from reoffending. So I was really, there's so many kind of contrasts within that kind of relationship that I'm continuing, I think, to explore in my work.
And did you so you said about your working for the charity, did that sort of influence the people that you met in that? Obviously influence?
Well, in my future novels it is in the lake. Well, I have in the lake, there's themes to do with domestic violence and coercion. So I've definitely worked with women who've experienced that, and very much like Helen, you don't write about particular incidences. You kind of take your general experience and comment on it, because for me, you're trying to highlight issues in society in a way that a reader can engage with and think about and make a decision, their own decision. So definitely, but I think I came from a sort of fairly kind of secure working class, lower middle class environment to going into homeless hostels and working with drug addicts, and it was a real eye-opener. But ultimately these are people I really feel need our support and our compassion.
That's great. Did you was it a difficult journey for you, for both of you, to be published? Was it some of the people that I've spoken to are incredibly lucky, and you know, they send off their book and then, you know, hours later they get a phone call and they, you know, they have somebody I spoke to last week had, you know, her debut novel, and she had 10 publishers wanting to buy this book. So I mean, that's, I know from experience, that's not the general way that it goes, and she was extraordinarily lucky, and it was a great book, but you know, I know that that's not normally the way it goes. So Helen, did you going back to 2007, was it 2017 your first?
Yeah, that's when the first book came out. I had self-published 2 books before that, in fact, and not, I mean, they're fantasy. That's, you know, it's nothing to do with what I write now. And I wrote them very specifically to say if I could start writing something and finish it, and if I could write a full-length novel, and if I would enjoy the process of it. It didn't occur to me at that stage at all that I wanted to be a professional full-time writer. It didn't occur to me that I would ever try and get an agent. I just kind of sat down and went, oh, this is fun. And I did those 2 books, I mean, really quickly. I think I was just kind of warming up. I can look back now and go, you know what, I was just gearing up. And I think that somewhere in, you know, my subconscious was already a plan, but I really hadn't accepted it. And in fact, I booked into the Winchester Writers Festival, which is an amazing weekend, sort of full 40-hour festival. But they also give you a chance to pitch to an agent, send bits of your book off to an agent. And by that stage, I had, in fact, I did that 2 years running. And the first time I took one of these fantasy books just to say, look, I've tried it and it's quite good fun. And then somebody read that and went, actually, you're at a stage where you can get an agent. Why don't you do it? And I kind of went, all right. And not with that book. I went away because I realized I wasn't writing anything mainstream enough. I wasn't writing anything commercial. It was just a bit of fun, but it wasn't the right thing for me. So I went away and wrote something else. And then the following year, before the festival, you're allowed to start submitting, and I submitted, and I was very lucky. I got an agent very quickly. It took longer then to get a publishing deal, because actually everyone starts off going, oh, I just want to get an agent, and you don't realize actually that there's a lot more heartache between the process of getting an agent and getting published. So it took a while to then get a publishing deal, but by then I'd written what turned out to be Perfect Remains, and I got a 3-book deal. And it's quite fun. You know, when I was writing Perfect Remains, I wasn't thinking I'm going to start to write a detective series. I wrote 1 book, and the publishers said, great, we want 3 of those, it's going to be a series. And I kind of went, oh, really? Because actually no one prepares you for the psychology of sitting down to write your second book, book. That's the harder bit than writing the first book. If you speak to most authors, they will say you go into second book shock, which is where you celebrated so much. You've got an agent, you've got a book deal, you know, somebody hands you something that actually looks like a book, and you're all like, get me. And then your publisher goes, and you've got a deadline, and we'd like the second book in 4 months. And you kind of go, that's ridiculous. Yeah.
That's you now, isn't it, Louise?
That's me.
Sorry, Louise.
Yes, it's so, and you, Louise, so your story is slightly different, isn't it? You had a different sort of approach inwards.
It's really interesting because I think it's much of muchness. You never know. So I started working on the lake, and it was originally called Vigil, probably on and off 10 years ago, on and off. I had children. I was doing my degree at OU, and then I did a master's, and so I was trying to fit it in and working full time. So it wasn't sort of a full-time occupation. And then I finished it, and the funniest thing is I was sending it out to agents, and on the Monday I had my 12th rejection from an agent, and I was honestly thinking, right, okay, this is going to go on the shelf. Maybe this is not for you, Louise. I had a good talk to myself, and I said, maybe I'll just keep on writing because I enjoy it. And I really love writing, so I'm not going to worry about getting an agent or getting published. And then 4 days later, I got the 2-book deal with Avon Books. So it's really a testimony to not giving up. You just never know when that opportunity will come to you, and just believing in yourself, I think.
Yeah, and it is tough, isn't it? Because I mean, you do hear of people that, you know, get rejected 30 times, and then it must take a real amount of sort of inner grit to sort of think.
And I think you have to look at the work. So one of the things I did with The Lake was change the point of view. It was originally in the third person past, and really the book is so much about Kate's journey through this process of finding out what happened, how her mentally how she deals with it, that it seemed really natural to put it in first person. So you literally are walking in Kate's shoes and seeing her discoveries, some of them really shocking, through her eyes. But you have to kind of be open to that, and you have to be willing to, I think, accept criticism. You do have to build up a little bit of a tough skin, but in a good way, because I'm still, even though I'm not young, I'm still a newbie at this. And when I started working with my publishers, they changed the name of the book. And I thought, well, they're professional, I'm going to trust them. They made comments about nothing major, because I've really got on with my editor, Molly, and everyone at Avon Books is amazing. But so when they said to me, we think it would work better this way, I was thinking, well, who's the professional? Who's the one with loads of experience? So I thought, I'm going to go with this, and it's been really positive.
That's good. And you're, Helen, you've written one a year. It's in the publishing, isn't it, for the for your DI Kalanack series. And is so moving over to you've moved over to the new series. Will you've got another one coming out in that series? Are you going to have, because you've 7, is this number 8 is?
Yeah, so there are 6 in the detective series. That's not finished yet. We're just having a break and doing something else. So the Perfect series, that's the title. That's not me telling you it's perfect. It's not. That's the Perfect series. So there will actually be another one in that series. The Shadow Man was written to be a standalone, and then it went out on NetGalley. For people not familiar with that, that's a website where reviewers and librarians and educators and things can get books early and have an early read, which means we can get feedback. We got it was certainly more than 250 reviews on there, and I think about 90% of them have asked when the sequel's coming out, because of course it's about a profiler, a forensic psychologist, and people seem to really like that, and they like like her character, and so I'm getting a huge amount of people saying, can we have another one, which was a bit not something I anticipated at all. So I don't know, one of those stages where I don't know.
Sounds like a big yes.
I know.
That was going to be my question, actually, was when you've written a successful series and you've had a break, and then it was advertised as a standalone. So
that there's a real possibility that there'll be a return of my profiler. The detective series has 2 very strong leads, Luke Kalanack and his counterpart Ava Turner, and there's a bit of an on-off kind of relationship between them, I literally get people. I get people, which is the biggest compliment as a writer. People message me and go, "What's happening with Luke and Ava? What's happening at the moment?" Where as if, and genuinely, as if their lives they are in my head. So this is not a problem for me. Their lives are just carrying on the same timeline as everyone else, but not just saying, "Is there going to be another book? Are they going to whatever?" People going, seriously, where are they now? Because Natasha Dell and they haven't got together yet, and what's happening? And people get quite cross with me for keeping them waiting. But in fact, I've got a book coming out in a year, which I've already finished writing, and that too is a standalone, set on the Isle of Mull, and that's my first person book, and so I am now going to go back to writing either Kalanack, or I'm going to write another forensic profiling book, or I will run away and do something shocking and write none of those things.
Write a rom-com with
I'm going to write a killer
murder.
Killer rom-com. I've got a couple of questions from Facebook. So a question from Adam, which says, are you more likely to get published as a crime writer compared to other genres?
Well, in terms of the reality for women of a certain age, there seems little limitation in gender and age in crime. And it's the most read genre in the country, and I think there's lots of opportunities and competitions and things. But ultimately, Adam, I think you have to write what matters to you, what you feel strongly about, because that's where the magic happens, in the authenticity. When thinking about my own situation, it was sort of luck, sort of things coming together at the right time. But ultimately, I think you should do what feels good for you.
Yeah, that's a real tricky one, because Louise is right. Their biggest readership is crime, which means they need more crime books. Also means there are more crime books out there. A lot of people writing it. So if you're going to have a successful crime book these days, it's got to be pretty unique and unusual. One of the biggest problems I have when I'm running through new ideas and what I'm going to do is I do that and go, oh, Claire McIntosh just did that last week. And, kind of Val McDermott. I mean, when I tried to get, when we were first looking at getting the Scottish detective series out, one of the publishers went, no, Ian Rankin's got Scotland covered, forget it, kind of thing. And part of you wants to scream, the other part's going, no, you're probably right. So Adam, it's tough. It's tough writing a crime series, because you've got to be really on your game, I think, to get a crime series launched or a crime novel. That said, Louise's advice is absolutely right. Actually, all you have to do is write the best book you can write, and whether that's crime or comedy or literary fiction, it doesn't matter, as long as it's the best book you can write. And actually, the only way to write a really good book is not to try and write something that you think will be necessarily commercial. It's to write a book that you love and that you feel passionately about. Because I think too,
Helen, that also, when people think about a trend, I'm going to write a book like that. By the time you've written the book that's copying a trend, that trend's moved on to something else. So that's why you really need to stick to, if you're interested in crime, read crime. You can do online courses that are relatively inexpensive. You can find a lot of free resources. But I think it's really about, if it's authentic, then it will connect with people.
I think that's really good advice. Thank you. So looking at so you've both got sort of work in progresses at the moment. One thing I was interested with you, Helen, was your suffragette historical novel. That was quite a move away from, and when you what made you, were you crimed out, or did you just think, I just want to write something completely different?
I did. I mean, I say that. I was trying to write a historical novel, and it turned into the most dark, gritty, but and actually, this is set between the Edwardian and Victorian periods in London, and actually, it's about a young woman who gets pushed into a set of circumstances. She's widowed with 2 very young children, and has been brought up in at Romney Camp. There's a travelling fair, and she can count cards. She's been brought up with a dad who ran a gambling tent, and she is extremely gifted. And in order to make money when she loses her husband, she goes back into the Victorian gaming houses and becomes basically a hustler. Nice. And that leads to a much darker set of circumstances, where in fact she ends up, because she's young and pretty and people are easily fooled by how vulnerable she is, she ends up working as an assassin. So I tried to write, this is terrible, I tried to write a historical novel, because actually that is what I read most of the time. If I'm writing crime, I can't read crime at the same time. So I read a huge amount of historical fiction, but mine turned into a fairly gory assassin novel, set against the background of increasingly industrialized London and the rise of the suffragettes. It's a period of history I like. I love history. I love historical novels. At the moment, I literally just put down Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield.
Oh, that's a lovely book. That's really, I love her book.
Yes. And I love this stuff because I think historical gives you the options to take it as dark or as mysterious or as, as you want. But it's set within a different time and place. And I do find if I'm writing modern day crime, I need an antidote to that in the books that I read. And I think you're right. I think when I wrote these Lost and Broken Things, I think for me, it was a way of kind of clearing my head. I've been writing crime solidly for a few years. And for the first 3 years, I was bringing out one crime novel every 6 months, actually. And that is
full on, isn't it?
Especially when it's the detail on the forensics and all that sort of thing, and procedure and geography and everything else. And I wanted to write something that took me away from that. So yeah, I probably answered about 5 of the questions you had.
You did actually. You've ticked off a few. I'm having to scan through my notes and go. I've actually got a couple more from Facebook. So a question from Amy: do you have any more advice for budding authors? I don't know if we've already sort of covered that in Adam's question, but is there anything else that you would add as published authors that you would pass on to someone else?
I really believe you should write what you believe in and keep. I mean, this book has been floating around, as I said, but I really believed in it. I knew it really had something, and you got to believe in that. It's hard work, and I think Helen touched on that. You think of the kind of work so I think of all the sunny days I've given up. I've written in the back of cars, planes, trains, automobiles, everywhere. And that's the reality of it, is hard work. And then when I started working with an editor, I finished the book. I thought it was perfect, at least 60 hours of editing. So think of it as a profession, really take a professional approach. Find time for it, structure, kind of plan your novels. I think one of the things I'm doing now is really kind of planning my novels in a way that I can work through them. And I was just working on my second novel today, and it's actually going a lot quicker because I have a plan in my head. It will change, but if you have a structure, that's a really good way to keep on track, I think.
Yes, I think, I guess with crime as well, is the planning you need to plan more than you would some other.
So something happens in chapter 1, you better be aware of, like you said, because someone on Amazon on make a comment on Amazon. But I think just touching on what Helen said about doing your research and fact checking. So I mentioned to you earlier. So on Thursday, I spoke to 2 search and rescue experts from Dartmoor Search and Rescue about how a body can go missing on Dartmoor. So I know all about that. I'm going to be speaking to a brain surgeon, spinal surgeon soon. I've spoken to detectives, probation officers, chemistry professors. I've got this little list of people now that my fact checkers, which I keep on call, really.
That must be quite important, especially in the sort of when you are sort of touching on medical or procedural or something, to make sure that you get it right.
It's also really interesting.
Yeah.
Find out this stuff that's absolutely amazing, just generally. But you can bring that, and then there's that kind of authenticity. And I don't tend to, so I think Helen's probably, because of her background as a barrister, can bring a lot of really specific detail. I tend to touch on stuff, but if I don't know a lot about it, I'm not a forensic pathologist, so I'm not going to describe an autopsy, but I might touch on elements that I can research and find to just demonstrate.
That was going to be one of my questions, actually, was how do you do your research? Have you some people go off on the Orient Express, and do you obviously, Louise, you touched on the fact that you sort of speak to people.
I like speaking to people. Yeah, it's really interesting.
I guess especially at the moment as well, as it's not possible to visit places either. So I guess, have you been able to visit places, Helen, with your research of some of the...
Yeah, I my kind of golden rule is usually I don't write about a place I haven't been to. Obviously that, during lockdown, that in the last year has changed a little bit. But for The Shadow Man, and this was slightly luck, although you can apply to do it. I actually worked the whole case through with a very senior FBI profiler. And I managed to get in touch with her, and I sent her all my notes, that I kind of, that I had at that stage. It was before I started writing. So I literally sent a long rambling email that says, this is my antagonist. This is, he's suffering from this. The clues are going to be this. At the opening stage, all we're going to know is this. Then this person's going to get kidnapped. These will be the circumstances. But I want him to have this one particular syndrome. And she, bless her, I mean, she's a, senior agent, and she's worked some really impressive cases in the States. She went away and worked the whole thing from scratch for me, as if it were actually one of her cases.
Wow.
And was imagining the crime scene. And then I had a long teleconference with her going, right, so day one, we turn up. This is what we do. This is the procedure. This is how it works. This is what we call it. This is what I would note. These are the things. And then he's seen later. And she worked the entire case for me. I've got to say, that's not normal research, getting hold of an FBI profiler. And it was a kind of, a little bit of a friend scenario there, although you can contact the FBI and ask through their media department to speak to someone. But Louise was saying that it's really fascinating. I think I sat through that morning on the phone, and glad I was doing it just on audio, not that they could see me, because I sort of sat there so overwhelmed, because I find this stuff so interesting, and I kind of go, and I was really pleased, trying to put putting my big girl voice on, going, yeah, no, that sounds right. Most research is much more boring than that, but it's very, very interesting. But what you do find is this: you start research, you think you know what you're going to find. You find one tiny little shard of something you didn't expect, and that is almost inevitably the piece you pick up and run with. It's the thing you didn't know, you couldn't foresee, and that is what's going to take you forward. That's why you research. It's not to find the stuff that you already anticipate. It's because that's how you find something that you don't know about.
So today I was researching, I went from researching if you can use Botox for muscle spasms to researching bifold doors.
Yes.
That's the breadth of potentially.
It is a rabbit hole. Karen, can I say something? Because
yes, of
I'm
course,
very aware that we were in the middle of answering someone's question, and I had one thing I wanted to say. If I don't say it now, forget it.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
On good advice for debut authors.
Yes.
There is a book. It's a book that I got a long time ago from an American English professor, and it's called The Nighttime Novelist. It's not a book you see in this country anymore, but you can order it from Amazon, by Joseph. Can't remember his surname. You'll find it.
Yeah, that'll be.
And it's kind of in a binder. So it comes in almost a ring binder, and it gives you structure and exercises to do. But it's not one of those really long, dense, books about how to write a novel that you think, I can't even read that, let alone learn from it. I don't want to open the cover. This is absolutely amazing, because actually, as a debut author, it gives you something in sections and manageable, but makes you really think about other books and shows you other books, simple books or stories that you will know, and says, just have a think about how they moved on from point 1 to point 2.
So is it called The Nighttime Novelist?
It's called The Nighttime Novelist.
I'll write that down just in case anybody asks, or Karina
by Joseph someone or other, who is on social media and who's lovely and who answers questions as well. That is my helpful hint for the day.
Thank you very much. I've got one other question from Samantha, who's asked, how do you manage your time?
Good question. Well, like I said, you get up. I get up at. Well, I'm not an early riser, but I'm going to get up at 6. You don't go out for the walks with your friends. You don't necessarily go and do the things everyone else is doing. You have to really protect your time. If you've got kids, if you've got I've got a full-time job. So you really have to structure your time. The other thing I've started doing is, when I finish working on a section, I'll write a note underneath it. One of the biggest things that can kind of stall you is if you go back to reading what you wrote the day before, and that can just go on and on. So what I do is I'll write at the end of the section, I'll write the notes for what I'm going to do next, and I make myself go to that point and then keep on writing, because I can do those edits later. So it's about structuring however it works for you, putting a plan in place, protecting that time, giving the children chocolate buttons and sticking a video on or DVD on. And you have to protect that time. I think it's sacrosanct. otherwise, you just get frustrated. But I have a structure now. I've got an outline for my books, and I'm finding that really helpful.
Good. And Helen?
Yeah, I know it's a disaster.
I think I emailed Helen to say, "Oh, can we chat?" She's, "No, I'm homeschooling the kids."
I know. It's just. I'm sorry,
No.
but it is literally. I've got at home, and this is a great example. I've got a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and an 11-year-old. So I've got one freaking out about A levels, one freaking out about GCSEs, and one who's, just trying really hard to kind of motivate herself to get up in the morning. My husband and I run 2 companies, and I'm trying to do this as well. And the chaos, the truth is, the chaos here is spectacular. And
it looks so calm. We like locked them all in the cupboard or something.
There's glass. There's no calm in my house, but I don't have toddlers, so I don't think I could do this with really young children. That would be insane. I have a hugely supportive husband, which makes all the difference in the world. When I decide to do something, that time has to be productive. So I think there's a lot of truth in going, well, I can have a kind of relatively unproductive 6 hours, or I can work really, really hard for 3. I think as a writer, you learn to do that. It's something that you understand. But also, by the time you got a publishing contract, everything changes. So the biggest change for me between writing a novel in my own time and then trying to get an agent, that sort of thing, you kind of write when you want to, and you kind of do your own thing. And then all of a sudden you've got a publishing contract. And that doesn't just mean that you take it more seriously. It means that my agent is relying on me, and my publisher, and the people in sales, and my book's been booked in for a certain date. And there are other people's livelihoods depending on A, writing something decent, and B, writing it on time. It's not a joke. There's no artistic license with a deadline. You hit your deadline, you don't miss it. You mess other people around. It's really serious. I mean, being a writer is a job that changes the world. We're not surgeons. We're not police officers. No one's going to keel over, thank goodness, because writers are a flaky bunch most of the time. But when you're being published, there are other people to consider, and you do have to take it seriously. But generally speaking, I have 0 spare minutes in a day, literally none. It all just gets.
And I have this most enormous ironing pile, which I was tempted to show you, but I'm too shamed. I won't do that. I think one of the things when I used to teach creative writing to adult learners was think of yourself as a professional, behave like a professional, put into practice how you think a professional would behave, and then you're on the road. But I think the other thing is, it's one of the things I'm starting to realize now. I have a deadline, I have a commitment, I have a contract to produce a book at a certain time, and my life has to revolve around that, because that is my obligation. And like Helen said, a lot of other people's livelihoods impact on your ability to be that professional. So I think if you think of yourself as a professional, you will behave that way.
That's good. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I've got one last question for you, which is what do you read for pleasure? I know you sort of touched on it, Helen, when you said that when you're writing, you don't tend to read other crime. What's your sort of favourite genre now? What do you read for pleasure?
I do read a lot of historical, and I love things, the things that have really impacted me in the last couple of years have been things like All the Light We Cannot See, books like that. I quite like those. I do like books that take me away completely from this time, from this world, from my own life, and where I can literally just be completely immersed in something that is relatively unfamiliar. I think that's the other thing about not reading crime, is that first of all, as a crime writer, when you read other crime books, you spend the whole time going, right, okay, I'm going to figure out where the twist is. And it's really, you annoy yourself as you read. You're literally there going, I'm gonna, I've got this one. And so I read books where I can't do that, and I don't let myself do that. So yeah, so for me it is a sort of, but also things like speculative. I'm a big Margaret Atwood fan, you know, that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. Margaret Atwood, I'm a huge fan. I'm actually reading crime of Kate Atkinson, but I've been reading a Canadian writer called Louise Penny, who's written a series set in Quebec. So I was born in Quebec, and it's really just, I was saying to my husband, in the winter, they warm up maple syrup and you put it on snow and then it gets toffee-like. And I was saying to my husband, didn't believe that we really did that. I said, no, it's in this book, you know. So for me, it's revisiting kind of my childhood. So but that's a different style of writing. She creates these characters. She's got 11 books now. So it's teaching me a little bit about writing a series. So I am delving into different kinds of crime writers to kind of decide maybe where I want to go with my writing in the future and pick up good practice. So I enjoy that. I like Matt Haig. I'm looking at positive stuff as well at the moment. And
I think we all need a bit of positive at the moment, don't we?
Absolutely.
I think I've read more crime in lockdown than I think I've read in my life. I
wonder if it's a bit like when you go to horror movies, that you're experiencing that, but in a very safe place. So the same with crime, you can delve into those other worlds, but in a really safe place and explore that. So perhaps that's why.
I can't believe we've done our time, and we've had nearly 45 minutes, so we've had an extra bonus 5 minutes. So thank you so much for coming this evening. It's been really amazing. It's been so great to hear from you, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens for you both next. And the books, I don't know if have you got a copy of your book there, Louise? I've only got
it's not out. It's on Kindle in March, and then the hard copy's coming out in May.
So yeah, so The Lake is out in March, and Shadow Man is out on Thursday.
Yep.
So they are both available to order from Devon Libraries, because I checked. Yes, so please have a look at these, and thank you for joining us again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
You.
Thank you.